Senator from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate be in a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'm coming back to the floor, sadly, to make a speech that I promised to make every week that I'm in the U.S. Senate, as long as a pastor from North Carolina who's been in mission in Turkey for almost 20 years until he is released from a Turkish prison. And before I get started with that, I also want to thank Senator Donnelly for his comments, because I think we share a common concern with respect to the Joint Strike Fighter program, and that's something I'm going to have in my discussions. And I also thank in advance Senator Shaheen, who's worked with me on a bipartisan basis to highlight the concern that we have for a man who's been in a Turkish prison for 614 days. He was arrested in October of 2016 for nothing more than being a missionary. I went to Turkey about 2 months ago, visited him in a Turkish prison after almost 17 months of being in prison without any charges. They brought charges against them that are some of the most bogus excuses for evidence that you could possibly imagine. And I am certain that if it was somebody with these charges in the United States in a jail system or prison system, that they'd be released the day the charges were filed. This is Pastor Brunson. He's a little over 50 years old. Since he's been in prison, he's lost 50 pounds, and he spent almost 17 months in a prison cell designed for 8 people that had 21 people in it. That entire time without a single formal charge levied against him. Pastor Brunson is a Presbyterian minister from Western North Carolina, an area called Montreat or Black Mountain. And he was swept up in the arrest that occurred after the illegal coup attempt that I think was inappropriate and that I publicly opposed, because I think there's a peaceful way to change regimes. But Pastor Brunson wasn't one of the people who caused the coup. But if you went to that courtroom like I did and spent 12 hours in that courtroom, you would have heard absurd charges from over a dozen secret witnesses, many of them in prison, talking about the food that somebody may have ate, which is a preferred food of a terrorist organization, or the fact that a light was on in this small church in Izmir for 4 hours, and certainly there had to be something bad going on. That's the nature of these charges, and I'm not making it up. This man is doing everything he can to have the truth be heard, but I actually believe this is not about a judicial process. This is not about valid charges. This is about a political hostage. And I'll tell you the day that I was absolutely confirmed, this became a political hostage. It's the day that President Erdogan had the audacity to make this statement. President Erdogan believes that there's someone here in this country who was involved in the coup attempt. We've reached out to Turkey and said, if you can process a valid basis for extradition, we have a treaty with Turkey, an extradition treaty, we'd be happy to consider that based on the merits of the case. And we still would be. But the president had the audacity to say, well, we can just short circuit all this by you trading your pastor for our pastor. President Erdogan clearly demonstrated that he has the authority to release this illegally and improperly imprisoned American who's been in Turkey in prison for 614 days, but he chooses not to. Now, on a bipartisan basis, I should tell you that one of the reasons why I find this so insulting is because Turkey has been a NATO ally since 1952. I have to understand what being a NATO ally means. What it means is the greatest, the most powerful nation on earth has committed to deploying men and women in American uniforms to Turkey to protect Turkey if they're attacked by an outside aggressor. We have a commitment to protect the Turkish people. We have a commitment to put our men and women in harm's way to protect the Turkish people. But we have a Turkish president who's acting less like a NATO ally and potentially like a would-be adversary, and I don't understand it. And by the way, this isn't an argument with the Turkish people, who are great people. I've been to Turkey several times. They're wonderful people, but this president is taking a position that has to have a consequence. And again, you can go back and talk about what our obligations are under the treaty. First and foremost, it's to treat an ally that has that very heavy obligation to defend another nation, to go to some other soil and defend that nation, to treat them with respect, to treat their citizens with respect. If they're a criminal, present the evidence and prosecute them. There are Americans in Turkish prisons. They've committed murders, robbery, and other crimes, and there was legitimate evidence put forth for me to be okay with that. But I'm not at all okay with the way President or Pastor Brunson has been treated by the Turkish judiciary. We've tried everything we could for about a year and a half on a diplomatic basis, and it's gone nowhere. After my last trip to Turkey, I decided that we had to get Turkey's attention. And on a bipartisan basis, we started that by passing an amendment in the National Defense Authorization Act that will ask very important or ask for the answers to very important questions. One of those, some of those have to do with the illegal detainment of American persons in Turkey. The other one has to do with a very important, in fact, the most sophisticated tactical fighter that's ever flown through the air, the Joint Strike Fighter, or the F-35. Turkey is a very important part of the supply chain to the Joint Strike Fighter, and Turkey has requested Joint Strike Fighters to put into their air arsenal. On its surface, because they're a NATO ally, I don't object to it. But today, I strongly object to it. So we passed language in the National Defense Authorization that we'll be voting on fairly soon that will actually put Turkey on notice. Choose what you want to be. Do you want to be an ally that treats your other allies' citizens with respect? Do you want to be an ally that actually fields defense systems that come from your allies, not from a would-be adversary like Russia? Or do you want to actually go down the path and lose the support of the American people along the way? I want to thank Chairman Inhofe for his support of the amendment. I want to thank the big bipartisan vote, the members of the Senate subcommittee or the Senate full committee on armed services that voted for this amendment. And I look forward to getting this passed into law when we finally confer with the House and send a message to Turkey that we want to be your ally. We want to be there in your darkest hour to defend your security. Convince members of the Senate that you want to be our ally, that you want to treat our citizens with respect, and that you will free Pastor Brunson. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor.